lonely Apache Indian found refuge with two Apache sisters. That night changed his life. Jack rode alone across the vast Arizona plains, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows over the dry grass. The wind whispered softly through the cacti and sagebrush, and the distant mountains looked like giant blue ghosts in the fading light. His horse, a sturdy brown mare named Dusty, trotted steadily, though he could feel her slowing with fatigue. Jack himself was tired too. He had been on the trail for days, moving cattle from one town to another, sleeping under the open sky and eating whatever he could carry. His body ached, and every mile seemed heavier than the last. As he rode, Jack kept scanning the horizon for a place to rest. He had learned long ago that the desert could be dangerous at night. Coyotes roamed freely, and the temperature could drop sharply once the sun disappeared. He knew that finding shelter was more than a comfort, it was a matter of safety. His eyes caught sight of a small settlement in the distance, tucked beside a winding river. Smoke rose gently from a few fires, curling into the cool evening air. There were several small structures, wigwams, he guessed, made from wooden frames and covered with earth and animal hides. Jack slowed Dusty as he approached. His mind raced with both hope and caution. He had heard stories about settlers getting into trouble when they entered lands that were not their own. But something about this place seemed different. It looked peaceful, and the smell of burning wood carried a warm, familiar scent of home-cooked food. He knew he could ask to spend the night, but he also knew he had to be careful. "Easy, Dusty," he whispered to his horse, patting her neck. The mare snorted softly and moved forward with careful steps, sensing her rider's nervousness. Jack had always respected animals more than most people. On long journeys like this, Dusty was more than a horse. She was a companion, a friend, and sometimes the only comfort he had. As he drew closer to the river, Jack noticed movement near the edge of the settlement. Two young women were gathering firewood. Their long dark hair glimmered in the fading light, and their movements were careful and graceful. Jack could see the sunlight reflecting off their skin, warm and golden, as they bent and lifted sticks with skillful hands. They seemed unaware of his presence at first, focused entirely on their task. But when he cleared his throat softly to announce himself, both of them froze and turned to look. Jack raised his hand slightly to show he meant no harm. "Evenin'," he said in his calmest voice. "I'm Jack, just lookin' for a place to rest. My horse and I have been on the trail all day." He tried to sound friendly and respectful, hoping his words would show he meant no trouble. The two women exchanged a quick glance. Their eyes were sharp and cautious, and there was a moment of silence that seemed to stretch forever. Jack could feel the tension in the air, the kind that happens when strangers meet in places where trust must be earned, not demanded. He realized immediately that asking to stay here was not going to be as simple as he had hoped. I don't want to intrude," Jack continued, choosing his words carefully. "I'll be gone at first light. I just need a safe place to sleep for the night." He smiled politely, trying to ease the tension. Dusty shifted her weight nervously, sensing her rider's unease. Finally, one of the women stepped forward slightly, her eyes studying him closely. She said something in her own language that Jack did not understand. He nodded, trying to appear respectful, though he had no idea what she had said. Then the second woman spoke in the same tone, also in words unfamiliar to Jack. He realized they were communicating with each other about him, deciding together what to do. Jack took a deep breath and dismounted from Dusty, letting the reins fall loosely over her neck. He knew that showing humility was important. He didn't want to seem like a threat. He tied Dusty to a nearby tree and took a few steps closer, keeping his hands visible. "I can help," he said, hoping they would understand. "I can help gather firewood or fetch water. I don't want to be a burden." The women's expressions softened slightly, though they remained cautious. One of them gave a small nod, indicating he could stay nearby but not yet in one of their homes. Jack accepted this silently. He didn't mind. He was just grateful for a chance to rest his legs and let Dusty drink from the river. The water was cool and clear, and the horse lapped it quickly, her tiredness evident in every careful movement. Jack watched her and then leaned against a tree, taking in the surroundings. The settlement was small but orderly. Smoke drifted from several fires, and he could smell cooking food, maize, beans, and something smoky from the fire. Children's laughter echoed faintly in the distance, along with the occasional sound of an animal, maybe a dog or a coyote, yipping from afar. Jack felt a sense of curiosity mixed with relief. This place was alive, and the people seemed to have a strong connection with the land and each other. As the sun dipped lower behind the mountains, the air grew cooler, and Jack felt the fatigue from the day weigh heavier on him. He wanted to rest, but he also knew he couldn't rush the women's decision. So he spent the next few minutes helping Dusty settle and collecting small sticks to keep a small fire going. He thought back to his own family, long gone, and to the nights he had spent alone under the stars. There was a strange comfort in the quiet companionship of the land, in the gentle rustle of leaves, and the soft gurgle of the river. The two women watched him from a distance, whispering among themselves. Jack could feel their eyes, but he did not try to meet them directly. He knew trust took time, and he was willing to wait. He gathered some more firewood and arranged it carefully, just as he had done many times on the trail. His movements were slow and deliberate, showing respect for the land and the people who lived here. Night began to fall, and the sky transformed into a deep, starry canvas. Jack lit a small fire near the riverbank, keeping it modest so as not to alarm anyone. The flames crackled softly, casting dancing shadows over the rocks and trees. He sat on a small flat stone, tired but content to finally have a place to pause. Dusty rested nearby, her head lowered, ears twitching at every sound. Jack reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small piece of bread and some dried meat. It wasn't much, but it would keep him until morning. As he ate, he watched the two women move through the settlement, checking on small fires and calling quietly to children. Jack couldn't understand their words, but he could feel their care and attentiveness. He realized that this was more than a home. It was a community, a network of trust and responsibility. He had lived many days on the trail, but he had never encountered a place that moved him like this. He felt both humbled and fascinated, knowing that the night would be long, and the lessons he would learn here were just beginning. The fire's warmth and the sound of the river eased Jack's mind. He thought about the journey ahead, the cattle drives, and the many towns he had yet to visit. But for this night, he let himself simply be, a visitor, respectful and patient in a world that was not his own. And though he did not yet know what the two young women planned, he felt a sense of anticipation mixed with respect. The night was young, the stars were bright, and a new chapter of his life was quietly beginning beside the river in the Apache settlement. As the night deepened, the settlement grew quiet, but Jack's mind buzzed with curiosity. He had never been so close to community that was so different from anything he had known. He watched the flickering firelight dancing across the wigwams and listened to the soft sounds of the river flowing nearby. Every now and then, he would catch the faint rustle of leaves or the soft steps of someone moving quietly, and he would instinctively look up, wondering who it could be. The two young women, Leela and Nayeli, had returned to the edge of the clearing after tending to the children and the small fires around the settlement. Jack noticed how their movements were careful yet confident, every action purposeful. They carried themselves with a quiet strength that made it clear they were deeply connected to their home and their people. Though they had only glanced at him before, he could tell they were now aware of his presence and watching him, though without hostility. Jack wanted to approach them to ask if he could help in some way, but he hesitated. He knew that the first moments of meeting were important, and rushing forward might appear disrespectful. Instead, he decided to make himself useful in other ways. He walked slowly to the river, collecting small stones and sticks that could be used to build or maintain fires. Every so often, he would glance toward the girls, hoping they might notice his willingness to help. After a few minutes, Leela stepped closer, motioning for him to follow. Jack obeyed, staying a few steps behind her so as not to seem threatening. She led him to a small clearing where a few supplies were laid out, bundles of dried corn, pots, and blankets. Naomi joined them shortly, her expression calm but alert. They spoke to each other in their language, their voices soft yet filled with purpose. Jack could not understand the words, but their gestures and tone made it clear that they were discussing him. Finally, Leela spoke, slowly and carefully in a mix of their language and the few English words she knew. "You help, yes?" she asked. Her accent was gentle and her eyes held a mixture of caution and curiosity. Jack nodded eagerly. "Yes, I can help. Tell me what to do." Naomi stepped forward, pointing to a bundle of sticks and saying, "Fire, wood, prepare." Jack understood immediately and set to work. He carefully arranged the sticks and kindling, creating a small fire pit. Using the skills he had learned on the trail, he struck flint and tinder, and soon a small flame flickered to life. The girls watched him closely, occasionally offering small nods of approval. Jack felt a sense of pride. Though simple, this act of helping seemed to matter to them. As the fire grew, the three of them worked together. Jack gathered more wood while Leela and Naomi tended to the fire, showing him the proper way to lay the sticks and maintain a steady flame. Every time he made a mistake, they corrected him patiently, guiding him with gestures and gentle words. Jack realized that they were testing him, seeing if he was willing to learn, willing to respect their ways. He felt a mixture of humility and gratitude. He had thought he could simply ask for a place to rest, but now he understood that respect and effort were required. Once the fire was stable, Leela and Naomi led him to a small area where they had prepared some simple food, dried meat, corn, and a little water. Jack accepted it gratefully, sitting cross-legged on the ground as they did. He had eaten many meals on the trail, but this one felt different. There was a sense of connection in sharing food prepared by hands that had lived close to the land for generations. He ate slowly, savoring both the taste and the moment, noticing the care the women had taken in arranging it. As they ate, Jack began to ask questions, careful to keep his voice gentle and respectful. "How long live here?" he asked, pointing to the settlement. Leela smiled faintly and responded, "Long family home." Naomi added, "River, food, protect land." Though the conversation was limited by language, Jack felt that he was learning not just words but a deeper understanding of their lives and values. They were people who had survived for generations in harmony with their environment, and they viewed the land with reverence. After the meal, Leela suggested they walk along the river. Jack followed, keeping a respectful distance. The night was cool, and the stars shone brilliantly overhead, reflecting in the water like a mirror. As they walked, he noticed small signs of life along the riverbank, tracks of rabbits, birds settling into the reeds, and fish darting beneath the surface. The girls moved silently, pointing occasionally to a plant or a rock, as if teaching him the importance of observation and awareness. Jack realized that this was another lesson. They wanted him to see the world as they did, with patience and attention to detail. At one point, Naomi stopped and gestured toward a group of small plants growing near the water. She bent down and carefully plucked a few, handing one to Jack. "Eat, good body," she explained. Jack examined the plant and, trusting her guidance, took a small bite. The taste was unfamiliar but surprisingly pleasant. He smiled at her, showing appreciation, and she nodded, pleased that he had listened. It was a small moment, but it carried significance. He was learning to trust and be guided rather than simply acting on his own instincts. The walk continued, and Jack felt a growing respect for these two women. They were strong, knowledgeable, and deeply connected to the land. He began to understand that they were not just offering him guidance, they were testing his patience, his humility, and his willingness to respect their world. Each gesture, each instruction, was a lesson in trust and cooperation. He felt a sense of responsibility, not just to follow their rules, but to honor the trust they were beginning to place in him. As they returned to the settlement, the firelight from earlier glowed faintly in the distance, casting long shadows across the ground. Jack noticed how the girls coordinated with each other without words, moving with an unspoken understanding that came from years of shared experience. He thought about his own life on the trail, where independence and self-reliance were prized. Here he was learning a different kind of strength, the power of collaboration, respect, and careful observation. Back at the settlement, the girls showed him a place to rest, not inside the wigwam yet, but near a small fire under the open sky. Jack was grateful for the gesture. He knew that this was as much a reward as a lesson. The opportunity to rest was given because he had shown respect and willingness to learn. He sat quietly, feeling the cool night air on his face, listening to the soft sounds of the settlement and reflecting on the day's events. As he prepared to sleep, Jack felt a mixture of exhaustion and fulfillment. He had learned more in a few hours than he had in many days on the trail. The two women had guided him gently, teaching him lessons that went beyond words. He realized that his desire to simply rest in a wigwam had been short-sighted. True acceptance required effort, understanding, and patience. He felt a deep sense of respect for Leela and Nayeli, and a quiet gratitude for the chance to witness their world. The night grew colder, and Jack wrapped himself in his blanket, listening to the river flowing nearby. Dusty rested at a short distance, her breathing calm and steady. Jack's thoughts drifted to the long journey ahead, but for now he allowed himself to be present, to observe, to listen, and to learn. The stars above seemed brighter than ever, and in their light, he felt a connection to the world around him, one that he had rarely experienced on the open trail. Though he did not yet know what the next day would bring, Jack felt a sense of anticipation mixed with respect. The two Apache women had shown him that kindness, guidance, and wisdom could not be demanded. They had to be earned. And in that quiet night beside the river, Jack knew that he had taken the first step toward earning their trust. He closed his eyes, feeling both tired and alive, ready for the lessons and challenges that the coming days would bring. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the desert horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. Jack stirred from his sleep, feeling the crisp morning air brush against his face. Dusty was already awake, nuzzling the grass and stretching her legs. The river reflected the brightening sky, and the settlement began to wake as well. Jack felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. Today, he would continue learning from Leela and Nayeli, and perhaps take another step toward earning their trust. Leela appeared first, carrying a small bundle of dried corn and herbs. Her movements were calm and precise, as if every step had been practiced hundreds of times. She smiled faintly at Jack, acknowledging his presence without words. Nayeli soon joined her, holding a small pot filled with water from the river. Together, the two women moved with ease through the settlement, performing their morning chores. Jack watched carefully, realizing that every action held meaning. Nothing was done without purpose or care. "I help?" Jack asked cautiously, his voice soft. He did not want to appear pushy or disrespectful. Both women glanced at him, then at each other, as if silently discussing how much he could be trusted. Leela nodded slightly, pointing toward the riverbank and then to a patch of earth nearby. Jack understood. There was work to be done, and he was expected to follow their guidance. He moved to the river first, carrying a small container, and began helping gather water. The river flowed gently, its surface sparkling in the morning sun. Jack cupped the water in his hands, careful not to spill, and carried it to the small pot Nayeli had set down. She nodded at him in approval, a faint smile appearing on her lips. Jack felt a warm sense of accomplishment. It was a small task, but it was important. It showed he could follow instructions and respect their ways. Next, Leela showed him a small patch of earth near the settlement where they grew herbs and vegetables. She handed him a few small seeds and gestured for him to plant them. Jack had never spent much time farming, but he remembered some lessons from his childhood on his family's land. He dug small holes with his hands, carefully placing the seeds in the soil and covering them gently. Leela and Nayeli watched silently, occasionally adjusting his technique. Jack realized that this was another test, not just of skill, but of patience and willingness to learn. After the planting, the women led him to the edge of the woods nearby, pointing to a few fallen branches and bundles of dry twigs. Jack picked them up and carried them back to the settlement, arranging them neatly near the fire pit. He noticed the way the girls coordinated silently, communicating without words, and he tried to mimic their precision and efficiency. Every small action seemed meaningful, and Jack began to understand that this way of life was built on respect, order, and harmony with nature. As the morning passed, Jack found himself talking to the women more, though their conversation was limited by language. He gestured to show his intentions, and they responded with small words and careful explanations. He learned that Leela and Nayeli were sisters, responsible for many of the daily tasks in their home. They cared deeply for their younger siblings and had learned from their parents how to live in harmony with the land. Jack admired their strength and patience, realizing that this knowledge had been earned through years of experience and responsibility. During a brief rest near the river, Jack asked about the surrounding land. "Safe animals?" he asked, pointing toward the desert and hills beyond the settlement. Leela nodded and pointed to the river, then to the hills, indicating that each area had its own rules and dangers. Nayeli added gestures of caution, showing how to move quietly and observe without disturbing the wildlife. Jack listened intently, absorbing every detail. He knew that understanding the land was essential, not just for survival, but for respect. As the sun climbed higher, the girls decided it was time for a small lesson in survival skills. They took Jack to a clearing and showed him how to start a fire without matches, using flint, dry wood, and a careful technique that required patience and attention. Jack struggled at first, striking the flint too hard or too softly, but the girls guided him gently, showing the rhythm and timing needed. Finally, a small spark caught and he managed to create a flame. Leela smiled faintly and Nayeli nodded in approval. Jack felt a surge of pride. He had accomplished something he had never done before, and he owed it to their guidance and patience. After the fire lesson, they taught him how to recognize edible plants in the area. They pointed to small leaves, berries, and herbs, explaining their uses for food or medicine. Jack was amazed at their knowledge and careful observation. He tried to remember every detail, realizing that these skills were not only practical, but also a form of respect for the land. The women emphasized that taking only what was needed and leaving the rest was essential, a lesson that Jack knew he would carry with him long after he left this place. Later, the women invited Jack to help prepare a small meal. They showed him how to grind corn, mix it with water, and cook it over the fire. Jack worked carefully, mimicking their movements and following instructions. As they cooked together, the three of them shared quiet laughter and small gestures of camaraderie. Jack felt a sense of belonging he had rarely experienced on the open trail. He realized that respect, patience, and willingness to learn could create bonds stronger than words. After the meal, they led him to a quiet spot near the settlement and taught him how to make simple tools from stones and sticks. Jack was fascinated by the precision and skill involved. Each tool had a specific purpose, and every movement mattered. Leela and Nayeli showed him how to strike the stones correctly, how to shape them, and how to use them safely. Jack struggled at first, but with their guidance, he gradually improved. Each small success filled him with confidence, and he felt a growing respect for their expertise and knowledge. As the day drew to a close, Jack realized how much he had learned in just a few hours. He understood that staying in this settlement required more than asking. It required humility, effort, and respect. Leela and Nayeli had given him not only tasks, but also lessons about patience, observation, and harmony with nature. Jack felt grateful for their guidance and proud of his own progress. He had come expecting a simple place to rest, but he had found a world of knowledge, wisdom, and human connection. Before sunset, the women led him to the river once more, showing him how to care for Dusty and keep her comfortable. Jack followed their instructions carefully, brushing his horse and giving her water. Dusty nuzzled his hand in appreciation, and Jack felt a sense of contentment. He realized that this day had been about more than survival. It had been about learning respect, responsibility, and the importance of listening. As night fell again, Jack sat by the small fire he had built earlier. The settlement was quiet, the stars reflecting in the river and the cool night air surrounded him. He thought about Leela and Nayeli, their patience, and the lessons they had taught him. He realized that trust and acceptance could not be rushed. They had to be earned through effort, understanding, and humility. Jack felt a deep sense of gratitude and anticipation for what the coming days might bring. For the first time in a long while, he felt he was not just passing through the land as a lone traveler. He felt connected, even if only briefly, to the people and their way of life. He knew he had much more to learn, but he was ready. And in the quiet glow of the fire, with Dusty resting nearby and the stars shining above, Jack understood that this experience was changing him. He was learning lessons that would stay with him long after he left the settlement, shaping not only his journey on the trail, but also his understanding of respect, patience, and human connection. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the desert hills, casting a soft golden light over the settlement. Jack awoke to the gentle sound of the river flowing nearby and the distant calls of birds greeting the day. Dusty nuzzled his shoulder lightly, eager to start the day. Jack stretched, feeling both the stiffness from the previous day's work and the quiet satisfaction of accomplishment. He had learned much in a short time, and he knew today would bring more challenges and lessons. As Jack walked toward the central part of the settlement, he saw Leela and Nayeli already up, busy with morning chores. Leela tended to a small garden patch, checking the plants carefully for signs of growth or damage, while Nayeli carried water from the river, balancing the container effortlessly as she walked. Jack noticed how coordinated the sisters were, moving silently together, communicating without words. Every movement was purposeful and precise, showing the care and discipline that had been a part of their lives for years. Jack approached cautiously, lowering his eyes slightly to show respect. "Good morning," he said, his voice soft. Leela looked up briefly and nodded, her expression calm but welcoming. Nayeli offered a faint smile, and Jack felt a small surge of warmth. He realized that these simple gestures carried far more meaning than words. They represented trust, acceptance, and observation. "I help?" Jack asked, stepping closer. The women glanced at each other and Leela motioned toward the garden. Jack understood. He was to assist in the morning chores. He knelt carefully, mimicking Leela's movements, checking the plants for weeds or broken branches. He noticed small details he had never paid attention to before: the texture of the soil, the alignment of the plants, the careful spacing that allowed each plant to grow. Leela watched silently, occasionally guiding his hands to correct his technique. Jack realized that even small actions required mindfulness and respect. After the garden work, Nayeli led him to the river. Today, she wanted to teach him something different, observing the environment and understanding its signs. She pointed to the sand near the riverbank, showing footprints and small tracks left by animals the night before. Jack knelt down to examine them closely, following Naomi's gestures as she explained what each mark indicated: a rabbit that had hopped along the path, a fox that had passed, and even a bird that had landed nearby. Jack was fascinated. He had always traveled through nature, but he had never studied it so closely. The way Naomi noticed even the smallest detail amazed him. After a while, Leela and Naomi gathered Jack near the fire pit and taught him how to prepare a simple meal using only what they had around them. Today, it was roasted corn with a few herbs. Jack followed their instructions carefully, peeling, grinding, and roasting the corn while watching their movements closely. Each step had its own rhythm and importance. Jack understood that this process was not just about food. It was a lesson in patience, precision, and appreciation for resources. He could see how much care they put into every meal, and he began to understand why their community thrived. They respected every small part of life. Once the meal was prepared, they all sat together, eating quietly. Jack noticed the silence was comfortable, not awkward. It was filled with a sense of shared experience, of learning, and of respect. Leela gestured for Jack to try some herbs with the corn, explaining their taste and purpose. Jack followed her guidance, savoring the flavors, and realized that every ingredient had a story, a use, a meaning, and a connection to the land. It was unlike anything he had experienced before on the trail. After the meal, the sisters took Jack to a small open area near the settlement. Today's lesson was about tools and crafting. They showed him how to sharpen stones, carve simple utensils, and create useful items from natural materials. Jack struggled at first, his hands unaccustomed to the precision required. But Leela and Naomi guided him patiently, correcting his mistakes with gentle hands and soft words. He realized that learning here was not about rushing. It was about observing, practicing, and respecting the process. As he worked, Jack began to feel a growing bond with the sisters. They shared stories through gestures and simple words, talking about the importance of family, the river, the animals, and the land. Jack spoke of his life on the trail, of cattle drives, long days, and lonely nights. Though their words were different, the understanding was clear. They were all people trying to live well in a challenging world. Jack realized that connection did not always need language. It could be built through patience, effort, and shared experience. In the afternoon, the sisters decided to teach him more practical survival skills. They guided him to a small area with rocks and plants, showing him how to recognize safe paths, avoid danger, and move quietly through the environment. Jack observed the careful way they stepped, the way they paused to listen, and the way they watched the sky and ground simultaneously. He tried to follow, feeling awkward at first, but gradually he began to move more carefully, noticing the small signs that indicated safety and caution. It was challenging, but Jack felt exhilarated. He was learning to see the world as they did. Later, they returned to the settlement, and Jack helped prepare another simple meal. This time, it included roasted roots and some berries they had gathered along the river. He followed their guidance in washing, cutting, and cooking, understanding that every step had a purpose. While eating, they gestured to Jack to share his thoughts about the day. Though words were limited, he managed to express gratitude and amazement at how much he had learned. The sisters nodded, pleased that he was observing and appreciating their teachings. As the sun began to set, Jack noticed a quiet shift in the settlement. The children were called inside, and the adults began evening chores. Leela and Naomi took him aside to a small area near the river. They wanted to show him a traditional activity, crafting small objects from reeds and clay. Jack sat patiently, listening to their instructions and following their careful demonstrations. Each step required attention and patience, and Jack realized how much skill and focus this simple task demanded. By the end, he had created a small clay figurine, rough but made with care. Leela smiled faintly, and Naomi nodded in approval. Jack felt a deep sense of pride and accomplishment. That evening, as darkness fell and stars filled the sky, Jack and the sisters sat by the fire. They did not speak much, but their quiet presence was comforting. Jack reflected on the day, realizing how much he had grown. He had come seeking a place to rest, but he had received something far more valuable: lessons in respect, patience, and observation, and the beginnings of trust between himself and the two sisters. He understood that being accepted into their world required effort, humility, and attention to detail, and he was willing to continue learning. Before retiring for the night, the sisters showed Jack how to care for his horse, Dusty, and prepare a small resting area nearby. Jack followed their instructions carefully, brushing Dusty and arranging her blankets to ensure she was comfortable. As he worked, he felt a sense of connection, not just with the sisters but with the land, the animals, and the quiet rhythms of life in this settlement. For the first time in many days, he felt truly at peace. As he settled near the fire, Jack thought about the journey ahead. He realized that this experience had changed him. It was not just about survival, it was about understanding, respect, and learning from others. He had come as a lone traveler seeking shelter, but he was leaving each day with knowledge, skills, and a growing appreciation for the wisdom of Leela and Naomi. He knew that the lessons of today would stay with him long after he rode back onto the open trail. The night air grew cooler, and Jack wrapped himself in his blanket, feeling both tired and fulfilled. Dusty rested nearby, her breathing calm and steady. The fire crackled softly, casting a warm glow across the small clearing. Jack reflected on the day's events, the work, the lessons, and the quiet moments of shared understanding. He realized that trust and acceptance were not given lightly, but earned through effort, respect, and patience. And tonight, he had taken another step toward earning that trust. As he looked up at the stars, Jack felt a quiet sense of anticipation for the days to come. He knew that more challenges and lessons awaited, but he was ready. The bond he was forming with Leela and Naomi was growing stronger, built on shared work, respect, and understanding. He had come seeking shelter, but he was finding something much deeper: a connection to people, land, and traditions that he had never known before. And in that quiet night, beside the river with Dusty resting nearby, Jack felt a sense of belonging he had rarely experienced on the trail. The next morning, the desert was quiet and still, broken only by the soft murmur of the river and the gentle calls of distant birds. Jack woke early, feeling both anticipation and a quiet sadness. Today, he would leave the settlement, continuing his journey across the plains. But he knew he would not leave the same man who had arrived days before. Leela and Naomi had taught him lessons he would carry with him forever, and he felt a deep sense of respect for the sisters, their people, and the land they had shared so openly. Dusty was already awake, stretching her legs and nuzzling Jack's shoulder as if to remind him that the day had begun. Jack smiled, brushing her mane and checking her reins, knowing that she, too, had become a part of this small community in her own way. He had come seeking shelter, and in return he had gained companionship, trust, and understanding. The sisters appeared quietly, carrying water and small bundles of food for their own breakfast. Jack greeted them respectfully, lowering his eyes slightly in the way he had learned to show humility. Leela nodded faintly, her calm expression warm but serious, while Naomi offered a faint smile. Their gestures said more than words could. They were acknowledging Jack's presence and the growth they had seen in him over the past days. "Ready, ride?" Jack asked softly, knowing that the time had come. Leela nodded, pointing to Dusty and then toward the open plains beyond the settlement. Jack mounted his horse carefully, checking that Dusty was comfortable and steady. As he settled into the saddle, he realized that this moment carried a weight he had not expected. Leaving was not just a physical departure, It was a farewell to lessons learned, bonds formed, and experiences that had changed him deeply. Before he turned to leave, Leela gestured for him to come closer. Jack dismounted, feeling a mix of nervousness and respect. Leela handed him a small bundle, dried corn, a few herbs, and a carefully carved wooden charm. She pointed to each item, indicating their uses and meaning. Jack understood that these were not merely gifts. They were symbols of trust, guidance, and connection. He nodded respectfully, feeling a lump in his throat. Words felt inadequate. Naomi then stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Jack's shoulder. She gestured toward the plains and then toward the settlement, indicating that he must travel carefully, respect the land, and remember what he had learned. Jack smiled faintly, bowing his head in gratitude. Though their words were few, their intentions were clear. They had accepted him as a guest, taught him their ways, and now released him back into the world beyond their home. Jack mounted Dusty once more, feeling the rhythm of her movements beneath him. As he rode slowly toward the open plains, he glanced back at the settlement. Leela and Naomi stood side by side near the river, their figures calm and strong against the early morning light. Jack realized that they had become more than guides. They had become teachers, mentors, and friends. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for their patience, wisdom, and trust. The first miles were quiet, broken only by the sound of Dusty's hooves on the soft ground. Jack's mind wandered, reflecting on all that had happened. He remembered the first night when he had arrived tired and uncertain, unsure if he would be welcomed. He recalled learning to gather water, plant seeds, start a fire, and prepare meals. He remembered the quiet lessons in observing the land, recognizing the signs of animals, and moving carefully through nature. Each memory reminded him that respect, patience, and humility were as valuable as strength and skill. As he rode, Jack thought about the sisters themselves, Leela, with her quiet wisdom and careful hands, and Naomi, with her observant eyes and gentle guidance. They had shown him that leadership did not always mean speaking loudly or commanding attention. It often meant teaching through example, patience, and care. He felt humbled by their knowledge and grateful for the chance to learn from them. The sun climbed higher, warming the desert air. Jack rode slowly, taking in every detail of the landscape. The hills, the river, the small patches of vegetation, they all seemed alive, connected, and purposeful. He realized that his time in the settlement had changed the way he viewed the world. He no longer saw it merely as a place to survive. He saw it as a living system, full of lessons if one was willing to observe and listen. At a small bend in the river, Jack stopped to let Dusty drink. He looked back toward the settlement one last time, seeing the tiny figures of Leela and Naomi waving faintly. Jack felt a deep sense of peace. He had arrived as a lone cowboy, seeking a simple place to rest, but he was leaving with knowledge, respect, and a connection he would carry forever. As the day progressed, Jack encountered familiar sights along the plains, cacti, distant hills, and the occasional wildlife. But everything felt different now. He noticed small tracks in the sand, subtle changes in the wind, and the quiet calls of birds that he had once ignored. He remembered Naomi's lessons about observation, and he followed them instinctively, moving carefully and respectfully through the environment. He felt a new sense of awareness, one that brought him closer to the land than he had ever been before. Jack's thoughts also turned inward. He reflected on his life before this journey, days spent on the trail, always moving, rarely pausing, focused on survival and practical concerns. His time with Leela and Naomi had taught him a different kind of strength, the strength of patience, humility, and learning. He realized that knowledge and respect could not be demanded. They had to be earned, observed, and nurtured. And in the quiet moments beside the fire, in the gentle guidance of the sisters, he had learned that lesson fully. As evening approached, Jack found a small ridge overlooking the plains. He stopped and let Dusty graze while he rested. The wind carried the faint scent of sagebrush and the cool aroma of the river from the settlement behind him. Jack closed his eyes for a moment, remembering the laughter of the children, the careful instructions of Leela and Nayeli, and the quiet nights spent under the stars. Each memory was a reminder of what he had gained: wisdom, connection, and a deeper understanding of life beyond his own experience. Jack knew that the journey ahead would still be long and challenging. There would be other settlements, towns, and people he would meet, but he felt prepared in a way he had never been before. He understood the value of listening, observing, and respecting those around him. And most importantly, he knew that kindness and patience could build bridges between strangers, creating bonds that lasted beyond words or distance. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Jack and Dusty continued riding. He looked toward the horizon, feeling a mixture of excitement for the future and gratitude for the past. The desert stretched endlessly before him, but he no longer felt alone or disconnected. The lessons of Leela and Nayeli were now a part of him, shaping the way he saw the world and his place within it. That night, as he set up a small camp under the stars, Jack reflected on the entire experience. He had come seeking shelter, a simple night in a wigwam, but he had received far more trust, knowledge, and understanding. He realized that the two sisters had taught him lessons that went beyond survival. They had shown him the value of patience, the importance of respect, and the quiet power of guidance and care. He felt a deep gratitude that went beyond words. Before closing his eyes, Jack whispered softly to the night sky, "Thank you for everything." The stars above seemed brighter, reflecting in the river far behind him, and in that moment Jack felt a connection to the world that was both humbling and inspiring. He knew that, no matter where his journey took him next, the lessons of this small settlement and the two sisters would guide him, reminding him of the power of respect, patience, and understanding. The next morning, Jack awoke with the first light of dawn. He packed his belongings carefully, ensuring Dusty was ready for the journey. He glanced once more toward the settlement, imagining Leela and Nayeli continuing their chores, tending the river and watching over their home. He felt a quiet smile form on his face. He had arrived as a weary traveler seeking rest, but he was leaving as someone who had learned, grown, and connected in ways he had never expected. As he rode off into the rising sun, the wind carried the faint echo of the river and the memory of the two sisters. Jack knew that the world was larger and richer than he had ever realized, and that trust, respect, and patience were among the most valuable things a person could carry. With each mile, he felt a sense of freedom, knowledge, and gratitude, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, carrying the lessons of this unforgettable encounter with him forever.